Welcome to Grief Chats with Dana and Mira, where we talk candidly about all things grief and widowhood. Grief is hard. Let's talk about it.
Your hair looks really nice. I washed it today, curled it 7 hours ago. Well, you washed it. It looks really good. Yeah. This is what a shower looks like. Okay, should I welcome everybody? I'm going to welcome everybody. We officially get started. Okay. So welcome everybody. Welcome to Grief Chats. We're so excited to have you all here, and we're so excited to be doing this. I'm Mira. This is Dana. We are both young widows, and I don't know, at least for me, I can speak for myself. I think you feel this way as well. Like when my Brian died, I just felt like I was completely isolated. I didn't know anybody who had been through this type of thing before. And I was just like craving real conversation, like craving to have somebody who understood, who hadn't obviously been through exactly what I've been through, but just like the general sphere. Like we're in like a very niche kind of category now. Like, you know, so I feel like everybody in my life just, didn't get it. And all of a sudden there was like this huge thing between me and them. And it was really hard on everybody, but especially it was really hard on me. And I remember like finding you on Instagram, for example, and just being like, oh my God, I want to know her story. I want to hear what she has to say. Like it's the storytelling and the sharing of the grief kind of conversations I think are so important because it's so taboo, and it's so many things within the grief world, especially traumatic grief, especially going through like something like more taboo, like losing an out of order death is how I've heard it's called, like a very unexpected, and I mean, for both of us, losing like the loves of our lives and our partners, obviously there's a lot of stuff there that nobody wants to talk about, and for various reasons. And so Dana and I wanted to create a space where those conversations can happen, where we can talk about the things that nobody really talks about, that we all want to talk about. That was where the idea for Grief Chats came from. And we're going to give a little bit more of like the specific details about what you can expect and what we have in mind after we introduce ourselves a little bit more. So I think Dana's going to start because chronologically, her tragedy happened first.
I was first. Yeah, which feels like the story of my life of like, was the first one to get married of my friends for, the first and then of all the shit things that happened. So, yeah, before I get started on kind of my story, I just want to touch on what you said felt very similarly of wanting to talk and craving those conversations with people. And as much as my peers and friends were open to a certain degree and wanted to, if you haven't been through it, it's just really hard no matter how supportive your network is. And same thing, I went to the internet, like went to Instagram and blogs to try and find that community. And I feel like it took a long time. And I don't know if the grief space is expanding and people are just talking about it more, or if I'm just now in this lane where, we are all finding each other a little bit more easily. And we've all been out there, the whole time kind of on our own. But I am so grateful that we found each other. And immediately when I can't remember if you followed me and I followed you back or how we like initially got connected. But I remember just like your words and your openness from the very start just resonated so much. And I related to what you were saying, even though we were on different timelines, it just felt so real. And we've had these conversations, in DMs and offline. And so I'm really excited to bring them here and hopefully to start these conversations with other people outside of just you and I, because I think it's so beneficial. So thank you for doing this and, having this wonderful idea.
Yay.
Yay. So my story, I guess I'll start with Brad because that's the most fun part of the story, who is my late husband. And we met in college. We were seniors. And I wouldn't say we were college sweethearts because we didn't have that like nice little bow of meeting and dating and falling in love. because we met so late and we knew we were graduating and probably going in different directions, we kind of resisted our connection a little bit, and we're drawn to each other and just loved being in each other's space and company, having time together. But we were just such realists. Like, no, this is not going to work. We're gonna not date and do this. And so we had an on and off again, like up and down relationship for 2 years, and always just pulled back to each other. And he moved to Detroit after college, and I stayed in the DC area. And was just like, we're done. We're in different places. We're not gonna do this. And, you know, the universe or our connection or something just kept pulling us back together. And so, after a whirlwind, and this is such a long story, but essentially he called one day, like 2 years into this, and said he loved me for the first time. We kind of got out of our own way, and I moved to Detroit, like quit my job, broke my lease, and like literally was living in Detroit a week later, because it was just like, I was so in love with this person. And it was like, we finally got out of our own way and we're like, we're going to do it, and had this just like lovely whirlwind relationship. And the beginning, it's like, now I can look back and with so much fondness and experience and life, and like our early 20s of just making terrible mistakes and breaking each other's hearts, and, you know, living life together and then coming together. But once I moved to Detroit, it just shifted everything. And we were kind of the example of like a great relationship for our friends, because we were the earlier ones to get married. We got married in 2008. And just really, really wonderful. And I feel like I could talk about Brad and that forever, but we're not going to do this all day. So I guess I'll just skip ahead. In 2016, Brad felt a pain in his side. And we just assumed he pulled a muscle. He was an active runner and played golf a lot. And we were like, oh, he must have just pulled something, and kind of brushed it off. And it kept coming back. And he finally went to the doctors, and through a bunch of tests and a bunch of different appointments and misdiagnoses, we finally got a scan. And just, you know, masses everywhere, and it turned out to be stage 4 renal cell carcinoma, which is kidney cancer. And it just was like, I mean, you know, that kind of news and diagnosis at any age, I'm sure, is shocking, and at our age was shocking. And for us, I'm also a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed in 2011, and so it was just one of these like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is not actually possible that we are going through this as a couple again. And I think we were still, like, we had spent, from my diagnosis in 2011 to Brad's in 2016, we had spent those 5 years with this like cloud of cancer, and like kind of overshadowing everything, this little bit of fear, but that I would die. Like, that's how we lived, like, preparing for me to die and for Brad to be the widower. And that sounds so morbid, but I had relapsed shortly after my first treatment finished, and I had a clean scan. And so after the relapse, it was just like really bad news of having a relapse that quickly. And so it really was like, mentally, I was prepared to be like, all right, like, been a great time, lived a lot in my 28 years. And so Brad getting the diagnosis, like, shook me to my core. Like, my physical body, like, was shaking, and I could not control it, because I couldn't comprehend Brad being in that position and being at stage 4 and getting a terminal diagnosis after everything we'd been through, and him being just this healthy, beautiful human. Like, it just wasn't a possibility. And so we spent, I won't speak for Brad, but I feel like I'm the only one that can speak for Brad, but I was in heavy, heavy, heavy denial, and like resisted the idea of him dying. It was just like, this is not an option. And Brad was always more realistic, like always open to having the conversation and pushing it, and like such a way that made you feel comfortable. Like, he just had this really special gift of having difficult conversations with anyone from any walk of life. Like, it was just magical to watch. And so naturally his response was, we're going to talk about it. He started a podcast. He blogged about it. Like, he was so open from day one, like literally in the hospital room, hit record on his phone with me and his best friend and was like, well, let's fucking talk about it. And so that is, I give Brad all the credit for me with the Forced Joy Project and being so open and willing to have these conversations, because not only did I see how important it was for Brad, but we would get random strangers that would reach out and comment about how much that meant to them, whether they were going through something similar or just some other type of fear under the umbrella. It didn't have to be a terminal diagnosis, but allowing people to see that you can have those conversations and survive them. Like, they can be hard, you can cry through them, but like how great it is to actually talk about it. And and so we recorded everything so he lived 100 days from his diagnosis until he died in January of 2017. And we have 60 something podcasts. I use that term loosely because it's really just phone recordings, but we call them podcasts. But hours and hours and hours of conversations about life and death and fear and love. And it's so hard to listen to because it is literally Brad dying, and it is his decline being captured, and my denial being captured, and my imperfections as a human, as a supporter, as a caregiver, not wanting to come to the realization that I was going to lose Brad. And, I think there's a lesson there that I try and take with the Forced Joy Project of showing up imperfectly, still showing up, and there's so much power and strength of what we're doing, having these conversations, speaking about our experiences, and we'll fuck up and we'll offend people, but it's like, this is where we're at in the moment. And Brad is the reason for that. But I had a hard time because I worried about dying constantly. Like, it still was like death was there. But I think it's different when it's a terminal diagnosis from the start. And
his was terminal from the start. Like, the doctors told you guys that he would die.
They didn't say that. We had a really unique experience where one of our best friends was a urologist, and he was the one that encouraged Brad to go to the ER, and went to the ER that he worked at. And he's the one that actually broke the news, like came to the emergency room at midnight so we wouldn't have to hear it from a stranger, and told us. And he basically was just like, it's everywhere. At no point did anyone ever say Brad was going to die. And it was our friend that called me a couple weeks before Brad did die and was honest and was like, and that was the first time that anyone was like, you should call his family. Like, his organs were shutting down. And his oncologist called me the next day with the same results of the most recent scan, and was like, we're going to try this other, therapy. And at no point, we could have a whole episode and conversation on that. But, stage 4 terminal, where it was in his body, and then quickly how fast it spread with every scan. There was a different emergency, pulmonary embolisms, like it spread very quickly to his spine, to other parts of his organs. Like, I don't know, looking back, how I wasn't aware, like, from day one, even though there were parts of me that was like, I know what this means.
Yeah.
Like, looking back and like rereading like journal entries of that time, I don't know how I managed to live in that layer of denial. Like, reading and being like, this is so obvious. This is so fucking bad. It's so bad.
It's so not funny. Why are we laughing?
I bet it is. I'm like, what was wrong with it? And I just like, I mean, you must
denial
know.
and like all of that stuff. Like, it's just, it's survival. You also had to like survive and be his caregiver and like keep your shit together. Like, your brain protects you.
Yeah.
Sure.
What a weird thing. Like, and that was the first time I've ever really experienced that. And people say that, and I read all of this about it, but truly was like, we will beat this, like, and told myself that and believed it. And even as I was terrified, my body, the tension, like, was terrified every second of every day.
Yeah.
I could never actually admit that out loud.
Yeah, me too, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I totally relate to that feeling. Do you want to say anything else about like his death or anything like that?
I mean, it was horrifying and beautiful, and how he would have wanted it. Like his final days and weeks were, it was a party. We lived in a loft. We annoyed our neighbors 24 hours a day because Brad slept most of the time during the day, and his like couple hours of being awake and like alert were like at 4 a.m. and we had a constant stream of visitors of like his cousins and his friends that would be there and singing songs and telling stories and jokes, and it was so loud, and it was very hard for me who just selfishly wanted all the time with Brad. But like looking back at like the amount of love that surrounded Brad up until 2 days before, and then it was like, I mean, I think he entered hospice 3 days before, and at that point we had kicked everyone out minus his mom and siblings and my sister. And then it became this very calm, peaceful, beautiful, sad, heartbreaking couple days of taking care of him and then understanding like what was happening. And I still, Brad's sister had been through this with her father-in-law and had some experience. And I don't know how I would have gotten through this without her, because she would walk me through and be like, this is what will happen. And we had a hospice nurse that would check in, and she was good too. But to have somebody that, was so close to us, like walk me through it. I just want everyone to have that, because it is such a terrifying thing where I'm like, what do I do when he dies? How do I give these morphine shots in him? Like, how do I handle all of this stuff that you learn so many things that a nurse does and a hospice nurse does that become, at least for me as a spouse, that was my responsibility. But then the idea of Brad dying, and I've heard you talk a little bit about this, so I'd be curious to hear. I know yours was a little bit different, but I was really terrified at that moment and not wanting to be alone, and just not knowing how to handle it. And so just so grateful for Brad's family to be there. And, he died holding my hand in our bed, and at a point where there was some initial relief, because at that point I knew he was never going to be Brad again. He was never coming back. And again, I think if you haven't been through to like have any kind of relief, especially with a quick diagnosis, like it's not like I'd been doing this for years with him, but I knew Brad and how he wanted to live and how he didn't want to live. And it was just, that was his time to let go. And, and then, I spent time with his family, and I threw a beer bottle off of my roof and broke a window across the street. And that's how my widowhood journey began. Cheers.
Cheers.
And with all the grace in the world.
Oh, man.
Still, living up to it.
Okay. I'll tell my story now.
Okay.
My tale of woe.
Yeah.
So my partner's name was Brian, and we met, we had a really like beautiful synchronistic kind of a meeting. It's never going to be topped. Like, you can't top this story. It's like, I'm screwed forever now, because it was just like the best. So basically we met like at this dance party that I'd been dragged to by my friends, and he'd been dragged to by his friends, and he was like insanely tall. So, I just got there and I was like looking around, and I saw his head like way above the crowd, and it was just so cute. And he was just like standing there, and it was this really awesome like world music, and just like this awesome dance party with like all different ages and people, and just such a cool like iconic Toronto kind of thing. We live in Toronto, in Canada. And so I saw his cute head, and I just kept looking at him, and then he kept looking at me, and we were just looking at each other, and he was kind of standing like outside of the throngs of people, just kind of comfortable standing there. And I just like, there's something about that guy that I don't know. I was drawn to him, but also I was like, I kind of just feel like comfortable. Like I want to like go cozy up with him or something. Like he looked like home. Like it was just crazy. And so my friend who I was with was like, that guy keeps looking at you. I'm going to go over there and introduce you guys. And I was like, what? And then she ran over. Her name's Chelsea. And like when we had our daughter, Brian was like, we should name her Chelsea. After Chelsea. I don't know if I've ever told Chelsea that, but anyways, we didn't. But anyway, she like went over to Brian and she was like, hey, Mr. Tallman, you keep looking at my friend Mira here. This is Mira, Tallman, Mira. And then she just literally like disappeared. Mm-hmm. And we were like super awkward and just kind of like talking and nervous. And then I got a text from one of my friends who was like, this guy wouldn't leave her alone, like at the other end of the room. And she wanted me to go save her. So I was like, gotta go, Tallman, bye. And like ran away. And then maybe an hour or so later, I felt someone like tapping me on the shoulder and I turned around. He was like, Mira, I've been looking for you everywhere. Do you want to get a drink together? And I was like, oh yeah. Like, I feel like it's just so unusual for like a guy at a bar to like come back and find you. Like usually they just like go for someone else if you run away, right? Like,
like she,
right. Like I was really impressed that he was like specifically looking for me and remembered my name because no one ever remembers my name. People always have trouble remembering my name. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, he remembers my name. So anyway, we like had a drink together at the bar and we started talking about this, like all of this stuff. And like, that was the thing with me and Brian from the beginning. Like we just talked about everything. He was like such a deep thinker. He loved analyzing things. He loved talking about like people and spirituality and politics and the world and like philosophy and thinking. And it was just, I don't know, that was always a really amazing thing between us. And so he was so curious. He has such a curious mind. And so we just talked. We talked like all night. And then we danced and we were like making out on the dance floor. And I was just like, oh my God, like what's going on? And like, I feel like neither of us were the type of people that did that kind of thing, but especially him. Yeah. Like it wasn't like that unusual for me. I love it. But it was like pretty unusual for him. And then we went outside, we like stayed till the bar closed. And then we went outside and one of his friends, this woman who, I just like really got a good feeling from and trusted. She came up to me and she was like, I'm really good friends with Brian. He is like a good man. Like he is a really good guy. Trust me. And I was like, okay, I do. And I just did. Like I was like, this guy he's the real deal. And so we ended up walking around all night and we were like just kind of stopping and making out and talking. And then I ended up like convincing him to let me come home with him. Which he like did not want me to do. And he was like trying to walk me home and be a gentleman. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to sleep over.
I love it. I love it. Go ahead.
And then I told everybody at his funeral, like literally in front of everybody, I told him.
I love it.
I was like, he was such a gentleman, but I convinced him.
Yeah. I corrupted him.
I did. And so anyways, it was this really strange thing where like we woke up the next morning. It was March in Toronto and it was really cold. Like it was basically winter. And then we woke up the next morning and we went outside and it was like 25 degrees. And it was this crazy, like people remember, I've told people this story and they're like, I remember the spring of 2012 in Toronto. There was like a crazy heat wave in March and it went up to like 30 degrees. Like it was like a heat wave. And so people remember that. And just like, I don't know. It was just like we fell in love in this heat wave in March.
I love it. Title of the memoir.
But like he always had this weird sort of anxiety about his health and he was always insanely healthy and very like health conscious because he was concerned about his health. So it's just strange like what happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had like a relationship and we fell in love and we lived together and we had a baby. Her name is Davida, and it was really it was really like a good part of our life together when she was born. And when she like I had a really awesome birth at home and Brian was like right there with me and really kind of like grounding me through that experience. And it was awesome. And then about a year and a half after we had our daughter, Brian had this mole on his cheek, and he'd had it for a really long time, but it was under his beard. He always had a beard. And so we weren't like keeping really constant tabs on it, but because he had a history in his family of melanoma, he was going to a dermatologist regularly. And nobody in his family had ever died from melanoma. There had been a lot of melanoma, but it had always been like removed, and then that's it. So I didn't really worry about it, but our doctor had him set up with a dermatologist, and he was seeing her regularly. And this mole that was under his beard started to grow and turn into cancer, and we didn't know. And so he started feeling like he could feel the mole. He said it felt almost like an itch, but like a deep itch. Okay. And so he was like, I need to get that checked out. He made an appointment with the dermatologist, even though it wasn't time for his yearly appointment. Mm-hmm. And he showed it to her, and she was like, I think we should biopsy. She could like see through the hair that it was black. Okay. Which is not good. And then he had it biopsied, and then a week later or so, he texted me and he was like, can I pick you up from work today? And I was like, oh, yeah, nice. Okay, yeah, come pick me up. And then I got into the car, and he was just like, the dermatologist called, and the mole in my cheek was melanoma. And I was like, what? And it was like one of those moments when you're just like, what? Like, I remember the feeling of like my stomach dropping through to the floor. He was like, she said it was 5.8 millimeters deep. And I was like, what does that mean? Doesn't sound that deep. And he was like, she said with a melanoma tumor, she would be very concerned with a 1 millimeter deep tumor. And I was like, oh shit. Yeah. And like, that was the moment that really the first moment that it became apparent how aggressive his melanoma specifically was, because of how deep it had grown so quickly in his cheek. This was the summer when Davida was 1. The whole summer was basically taken up by like testing and waiting to figure out what the hell was going on. And all the news was good news. So first we did like a full CT scan of his whole body. The melanoma hadn't spread at all. Then he had his lymph nodes checked, because that's the next place it'll often go. Not no spread at all. Then we had his surgery scheduled, and he had, I guess what they tend to do is they'll like take out all the tissue and skin that they can from around the mole, because like often it'll spread first to the tissue, and so they want to get rid of all that to make sure. So he had his surgery scheduled. He had that surgery. There was a chance that they would have nicked his facial nerve, which would have affected his smile. So I was like super worried about that. But they didn't. The surgery went amazing. And then we went back in, and they were just like, yeah, no, we didn't find any melanoma cells in any of the tissue that we removed. So it seems like it hadn't spread at all. Like, you really got off lucky considering how deep that tumor was. It didn't spread. And we were like, it's a miracle. Oh my gosh. Like, we were like over the moon. And like, oh my gosh, like that, like let down after thinking that you have beaten it is just like, ugh. Yeah. So then we kind of like went on to live our lives, and it was almost like it didn't happen. Like, I mean, cancer was definitely looming more. Like, I think, like you mentioned, sort of like once you've had any sort of cancer experience, I think that it's different. Like you know that kind of thing can happen. It changes you. That perfect world is just like blown open. It can't really be closed back up, and like, you just, not even like necessarily cancer related all the time, but just like bad things can happen, and they can be totally out of nowhere. And that really does change you a lot, I think. So December 2018, I was like trying to convince him to have another kid with me. And he was like, I think something's wrong with me. He had weird symptoms, like, that now I'm like, oh, that was when the cancer went to his brain. Like, he was having blurry vision, and he was waking up, he was having night sweats, and he was waking up in the night, like every night at 4 a.m. and sweating so much, and, just feeling like off, I guess. But he was still okay. And then we went up to celebrate Christmas with his family. And I think a couple days after Christmas, he was like, oh, I think I pulled my back out. Like my back doesn't feel right. And he was building a cabin in the woods, and he had been building the cabin in the woods that day. And I was like, oh, you obviously just like, you're out of shape because you haven't been hauling logs the way that you used to. And like, you're crazy for hauling logs and tree trunks anyways. Like, yeah, your back hurts. And I was like, so not nice to him about it at all. And then we came back to Toronto, and we were supposed to have some friends over for New Year's, and like he just didn't feel up for it. And he was never really sick, so it was weird, but he had like a flu, and the flu just like never really went away and got worse and worse and worse. And throughout January of 2019, he was just getting progressively sicker. And the main things were like really, really, really bad back pain and the flu, just sort of like flu-ish symptoms. Really tired, sleeping all the time. And he was like trying to keep working, but just really not feeling well. And eventually couldn't work anymore and needed to take some time off to just like rest. And then he'd gone to our doctor and just had been like, yeah, I've had this like lingering flu for a few weeks. And also my back is really sore. And she knew his history, and she was like, do you have a scan coming up? And he was like, yeah, it's in March. And she was like, I think you should get it changed to sooner. Mm-hmm. And I remember him coming home and telling me, and I was like, what? Does Dr. Rakshani think that this is the melanoma? Like, what? And I was like, but the melanoma's gone. He went for a CT scan. And the next day, we got the results from the CT scan, and it was cancer everywhere. Like, just everywhere. It was like, he had 7 tumors in his brain, and it was all up and down his spine and in his shoulders and in his hips and like multiple organs. Like, I don't even remember all of them. Yeah. So I know that you also understand that. It's wild. Like, and that I remember the moment that he told me that, because he got the email on his phone from the UHR like hospital network sends an email, and they're like, log on to your network and find out your results. And then you find out that you have like insane stage 4. Like, we didn't even hear from a person.
That's crazy to me. That's crazy that you found out in an email.
On like a Thursday night. And also just from like a mental health perspective, I'm like, there were no supports in place for us. Like, we found out the most devastating, traumatic news on a Thursday night over email. I was freaking out. Like, I was freaking out, Dana. I was like such a mess that first night. I remember just being like, just sobbing and being like, you can't die. Like, you can't. Like, I just look back on it and I'm like, oh my God, poor Brian. Like, cause he was just like in shock, and he was so calm, and he was like, we're going to figure this out. We're going to figure it out. And I was like, we're going to die. Like, just so, but then I snapped out of it. So it was almost like for one night, I was just like losing my fucking mind. And then I woke up the next morning and I was like, okay, I'm going to get us through this. Like, I went into like war zone mode. Yeah. Like, I was like, it's war.
Yeah. We will beat this.
It feels like a war.
It feels like a war. Like, yeah, every day is just, what is the battle today? How am I going to get through this? How will we get through this?
Yeah.
I will put myself at the front line to do anything possible.
Yeah. Totally. Like, everything else just goes completely, I mean, for us at least, it was like so fast. Like, everything went on hold. Everything.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Our whole world was Brad's cancer treatment. Like, every day, the number of pills, his treatment schedule, surgery, recovery, other scans. Like, I mean, it was a full-time job. And then, you know, and I don't know with Brian of like his progression of disease in terms of his physical or even mental abilities, but it's, you know, the decline of Brad physically, you know, as it spread in his spine more, and it was like cracking the vertebrae of his spine. Like, the cancer was literally eating through the bone, like couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't get out of bed. Like, and it just was 100% needing help, which was me. It's not like there were resources of other people coming in. No one was like, here's your full-time nurse and person going to come take your husband to the bathroom or shit. Like, I'm like, where are those? Where were those? Don't those exist out there? Like, it's amazing to me how much a person does without having any idea of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, really being like,
it's true. It's true. And I think it's just that it's slow. Like, I feel like people that have those really long, at least, I don't know if it's different in the States, but in Canada, I feel like for people that have more like longer drawn out cancer experiences, they do eventually like get those types of resources to some extent, although I could be wrong, but I feel like at least to some extent, because we have a public healthcare system here, and I'm pretty sure that there is some PSW care that is provided for free. But we just like, it was just so fast that we didn't have any time for anything. Like no one even really believed like how fast it was happening. Even the doctors were like, this is insane.
Yeah. And same with Brad. It was the same. Like, I think they, in their mind was like a year to a couple of years was their like thought. And so for 100 days, I think you're right. There wasn't time. There was something about the speed of it that it was like every day was there's no time to research like what was actually available. The doctor, you know, you're one of however many patients, and they're just trying to find the right treatment and like how to solve this problem right now, because every day was a different problem.
Yeah.
It was just another emergency every day.
Totally. It's true. Yeah. Like I don't know about you guys, but like we never even had one day that was better than the day before. Never. Like it was always just worse. Every day was worse than the day before.
Yeah. And I feel like that's rare from people I've talked to. And that was our experience too. And even they're like, we're going to do the surgery and it's going to be hard because you're recovering from like, I mean, literally cutting Brad open, like completely open. And they're like, the recovery is hard because it's a major surgery, but you will feel better after, 5 days or a week. Like the tumor burden will be gone. And, even the moments of like, you'll start this treatment and even if it doesn't work for a long time, you'll feel better. And every day was worse. Like every day was new debilitating pain and a new symptom. Brad also had, he developed double vision in his eyes. So issues where, it was in the spinal fluid and they thought he had like the weirdest brain scans that they couldn't tell. It was like this perfect, like, glow around his brain, but they couldn't actually find like even the doctors were like, we don't know what this is. Like, we are assuming you have cancer in your brain because of all these symptoms and what's happening, but we have never seen this. It was like he was this rare, bizarre case. Even like typing it in terms of the type of renal cell carcinoma, they were like, finally, after he died, I got all the stuff back and they were like, this doesn't exist.
Wow.
Like he was just this rare, was Brad. He was this rare bird of a human. And so it's like, of course he has like the only cancer in this thing that no one knows what the fuck he's with. Like, way to be that way till the end, Brad. Like, no other way to go. But it's just crazy. Like the whole thing is crazy. And it's so like, just to reflect on it.
I know. And it's wild too that like, I just had like a moment when I kind of zoomed out on us right now talking like this. And I'm just like, it's crazy. Like thinking about that time, the me in that time, ever imagining that like less than 2 years later, I would be like, laughing and
oh my God,
having a drink and talking with you about it. Like it's just the human spirit is insane. And it's not that it doesn't hurt any less. Like it's not like I'm not as sad, but it's just you develop this like ability to hold different things at the same time. It's just beyond me. It boggles my brain.
Yeah. I will never be okay with Brad dying. Like at 35 years old and leaving me a 33-year-old. Like I don't care how wonderful and happy my life is moving forward. Like I'll never be okay with that. And it will hurt my heart forever, like forever. And I think there is something, and I think part of the reason we wanted to have these conversations is I think having these conversations as people that have gotten through those initial, like daily, every second of every moment is treading water and drowning and painful to be here where it still hurts, but it's like you just adjust to the pain. Like you learn to take that pain and it's part of you and part of your heart and your soul. And makes it easier to talk about, because there's this level of like not accepting Brad's death, but accepting that this is the reality and this is unchangeable, as much as I wish that was not the case. That allows me to be here and drink some wine and have these conversations with you. And hopefully somebody earlier can see that and be like, maybe one day I'll be there too, you know? And I think that's important, and maybe will also be really hard for someone, I don't know, to see this and see us laughing about it, which can come across as so fucking insensitive, but it's like, there's like, at some point you just have to laugh. Like,
I think
at the absurdity of life and your situation and how we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I remember really early on, like no way when Brian was sick did I have any time to like look into anything at all. But I remember like quite early on in my grief, listening to podcasts or something like that with like widows further out talking like this. And it did actually provide me with, I don't even know if comfort is the word, but like something sort of like hope, like in some way, where I was just kind of like, okay, so like they've literally been through what I've been through. And this is sort of like a proof that people do continue living in some way, and it's really hard to even like put yourself back in those situations. But I think that, there is something about it that's like hopeful and helpful, and yet like sometimes you just have to laugh at like this crazy shit that happens in life, it's like,
yeah. I mean, even the day Brad died and I'm sitting on that roof with his sister and brother and my sister drinking a beer in complete shock and sadness. I don't remember what someone said, some inappropriate, terrible, dark joke, probably at Brad's expense. These were like his best friend was there too, like his favorite people in the world. And we just like start laughing so much that we're crying. Like the day Brad died, and what a bizarre alternate universe experience that I still don't know how to describe what it's like to like literally have your heart ripped out of your body and to feel like you are shattered in 1,000 pieces on the floor and somehow are laughing on that day with the people that you love the most in the world. And that's what life is. And I feel like I learn that more and more, like with every passing day of that duality and how that is part of surviving and being human. And the more we live, the more we will continue to go through this. And we were given these lessons unfairly early, as, anyone in our situation or any kind of situation that's dealt a shitty hand before their time, whatever that means, learns and takes and reacts differently. And not everyone will understand it if you haven't been through that. And that's okay. And it's probably preferable, to have that level of like ignorant bliss until you literally can't anymore. Yeah. Like, I'd love to go back to that life of ignorant bliss.
Yeah.
And have no idea what grief and sadness and loss feels like.
I know, it's so weird to imagine going back to that like altered existence.
Yeah.
Like it feels like I didn't actually really understand the world, you know? Like I just feel like I was like, it does feel like ignorant bliss. And like I didn't understand suffering. I really didn't understand suffering. And I was like less connected to the suffering of the world. Like I had less empathy than I have now. I mean, I just couldn't with, anyways, that's a whole other topic of conversation.
I mean, we could just talk for hours.
I know.
We probably have been. We were like, we'll talk for 5 minutes each and then wrap it up. This will be our short episode.
I don't even think I finished our story.
You should keep going. You didn't finish.
Where did I get? Okay, I won't like go into as much detail as I was doing though.
I love it.
Oh man. Oh yeah. It feels so good to tell the story, which is wild. Like I don't think people understand that. Like I just feel like I've been telling our story over and over and over and over and over again in my writing since he died. And it's like the only thing that helps for some reason, anyways, storytelling is incredible. Yeah. So anyways, yeah, he got the diagnosis, and oh my God, I was just a diagnosis. Jesus. I didn't even like start talking about cancer yet. Okay. I mean, I did, but not like the real cancer. Okay. So now the real cancer begins.
Real shit.
That shit before was not real cancer. Like, this is, when I look back, I'm like, that was like pretend.
Baby. That was baby cancer.
Yeah, that was baby cancer. Like, that did not count. We thought we were like in the cancer world. We were not. No. So then we entered.
Before you get into the real cancer, what was the timeline between baby cancer and real cancer?
Like another year and a half. So we got the diagnosis, and, you know, I freaked out. Brian was super calm. When he went to sleep that night, and I was like having a panic attack. Like, I was like, oh my God, I was so scared. I was like, he's going to die. He's definitely going to die. Like, I just like could not. It was like torture, and it was this loop in my head of like, Brian is going to die, he's going to die. And like, I'm so scared. I'm so scared. And that was when I started writing. And I'd always sort of like been a writer, but I'd never really, been like a writer as in I wrote in my journals and stuff.
Yeah.
When I was like, okay, where's a journal? And I like found one on the top of a bookshelf, and I was like, I need to write. And I just like wrote about what we were going through. And like, that was when I started really writing. And then I kept writing throughout the whole time that he was sick and as he was dying, and writing's been a really big thing for me since he died. And a really important like tool for me in my grief. So anyways, then what proceeded from that diagnosis was like just under 7 weeks of hell, basically.
Yeah.
So there was like just under 7 weeks from diagnosis to his death. And like 2 days after that diagnosis, we hadn't even seen an oncologist yet. And I had to take him to the ER because he had so much fluid buildup in his abdomen, which is like, I don't know if you guys went through that, the ascites, and then they drain the fluid. And now I know that that's like a pretty end stage kind of thing that happened.
Brad had that in like his last couple weeks.
So yeah, that was like 2 days after diagnosis for us.
Wow.
And so we went to the ER, and obviously like he was dying, right? Like that's like an end stage dying kind of thing. So we went to the ER, and like the ER doctors were just like, oh my God, you haven't even seen an oncologist yet. Like they were just like, what the fuck is going on? And I remember this one doctor came up, and he was just like, have you guys seen these scans yet? Like, it doesn't look like you've seen a doctor yet. And we were like, we know. Just like, please drain the ascites. Like, my dad's a doctor. And I was like, we know it's ascites. We know it needs to be drained. Please just drain it. We want to go home. Like, please just do it. We haven't seen an oncologist yet. We have an appointment on Monday. We know how bad it is. Like, just leave us alone.
Take care of this.
Yeah. And so they did. And they drained it, and then we went home, and then we saw the doctor on Monday, and I thought he was going to be like, I definitely thought he was going to be like, there's nothing we can do. Like, I was like, he's definitely going to say there's nothing we can do. But he was like really hopeful, and he got us like kind of pumped up. So then there was like maybe a couple weeks when we were like slightly hopeful with reason. Mm-hmm. Like the doctor actually told us that he thought that Brian could get better, which is kind of weird. And I don't know if it's actually true. With the extent of his spread, like, I don't actually know if I believe that he was, like, there's a lot I still have to unpack about that time. But anyways, he had, like, they recommended immunotherapy with whole brain radiation. And so he had the whole brain radiation for like 12 days or something. It made him feel horrible. He had the immunotherapy. It didn't do a thing. Like, it didn't do anything. It didn't affect him. He didn't have it. Like, nothing happened. The cancer just kept growing.
Same with Brad. Immunotherapy did literally not. And we had a similar experience in the beginning of new state-of-the-art immunotherapy, breaks through the blood-brain barrier. Like, this is it. Like, for where all your cancer is, did literally nothing. Yeah, literally nothing. That's crazy that we both had that. It was like, we were fighting with the insurance company because like $100,000 per pill that you have to take every day, and trying to get this paid for this thing that like is probably peeing out tomorrow. like going through his system and pissing out $100,000 a day. Wow. It's also so wild, like your healthcare system. I feel like we should talk about that too. Like, it's just so different for us. Like, they were just like, here's this thing that's free. Here you go. Like, I didn't know how much it cost. Actually, I just remembered this. I literally hadn't remembered this until now. When the nurse was because his immunotherapy was
like in the chemo unit by intravenously. Yeah. And I remember when the nurse was putting it in, he was like, this costs like $100 or $500,000 or whatever it was. And we were like, okay, like thanks for telling us. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I knew how much it all costs.
Yeah. So very different. Anyways, the immunotherapy was once every 3 weeks. Okay. And so he had it like right away. Like they were like, we want you to start this like in 2 days. And then 3 weeks later was his second dose. And by the time he had a second dose, he was already like, he already had bed sores. He was already he couldn't sit in a chair. He had to be lying in a bed for the therapy. Like there was no way that shit was working. And they gave him that second dose anyways. Like he just had all of these different symptoms. And he was, he was in the end stages of his life. And I'm like trying to figure, I mean, I knew a little bit because I'm actually trained as an occupational therapist. Mm-hmm. So I had like that a little bit to help me. And so I knew like I went and got like certain pieces of equipment that I knew, but like, yeah, like no one told me to do that. I just happened to have that like insider's knowledge. Right. And yeah, and he was just in like so much pain and on so many painkillers. Like the cancer was just so extensively spread in his bones. And I mean, he was so sick and so quick that we didn't really get a chance to have a lot of the really big conversations. We did in like very small moments. Like we had these like very, very small, very pivotal moments. But we didn't get to like talk it out the way that we normally would have. And we didn't get to like, we didn't have any time. Like he was just either always sleeping, always in pain. And then sometimes he'd come out of it and he would like say a couple things that were very profound and very wonderful. But it was like, we weren't really able to have those really long conversations. And then, yeah, and that's like been a really hard thing for me too. That's been a really hard part of it is there was a lot that wasn't able to be resolved, that we weren't able to like talk through together. And I feel like I'm sort of like now having to deal with a lot of that stuff alone.
Yeah.
But anyways, he eventually had to be hospitalized because we didn't even know. So we didn't even know he was dying, but he had to be hospitalized because his calcium and potassium levels were out of whack. And so they hospitalized him and then they needed to give him another ascites drain. And by the time that happened, they were like, okay, he's definitely dying. Like we're not doing therapy anymore. Let's, we're thinking within a few weeks, think about what you want to do. And I was like, I want to bring him home. Yeah. I want to bring him home. And they were like, okay, well, he really needs this ascites drain, so we should do that first. We can schedule it for like a day from now. Let's just see how it goes. And I was like, okay. And then after that ascites drain, the doctor was basically like, this is progressing way faster than we thought. I actually would be worried that he would die in the ambulance on the way home. So if you're at all comfortable, like it's your choice, but we can, he had moved to like the palliative floor by that point. And he was like, it was nice. Like he had his own room and it was kind of all newly renovated and it was really quiet. And I was like, okay, we'll stay. And I got my sister to like bring all of this stuff from our apartment to the hospital. And like, I had like our lighting and like our lamps were there and pictures and different things. And then, yeah, he was in that palliative care unit for, I think, 6 days. It's actually this one time when a bunch of his friends came to visit and he just like randomly kind of had all this energy and he started like, he kind of like woke up from being really sick and was like cracking jokes. And he was like, all of his friends, like all of these guys were there. And yeah, he was like, it's a party. He was like, Mira, we're hosting a party. Like, and like it was like so sweet. And then he just snapped out of it again. And then he was kind of back to like basically being like half dead. Yeah. Like it's wild how that could happen. You just wake up and then go back and then wake up and then a couple of days later he died. And at the end, it was just the two of us. Like that day it had been, our families had been there and his mom and his brother were the last ones to leave. And then it was just me and I was there with him and he died in the middle of the night and we were like holding hands and sleeping beside each other when he died. So, I think I'd gone to bed maybe like 2 hours before he died. And I'd sort of been like talking to him and writing and crying. And I'd been really into doing a lot of Qigong at the time. So I was doing like Qigong around him and like helping, like there's like energy work you can do where you can kind of like move people's energy and suffering. And he said it was really helping him. And we were listening to the birth playlist that we played when I gave birth to Dee. And I remember this one nurse came in and he was like, wow, it's so romantic in here. Like, I remember him saying that, and he was so sweet. And I was like, thanks, Calvin. Like, it is, you know, and it's like, yeah, it really just felt like, I don't know, it felt like I was like helping him be birthed into this like new thing.
Yeah.
And it was also just so shocking and so sad and so traumatizing. And I was just like devastated. Like, just, but I totally felt relief as well. So even though it was so quick, like even quicker, because like it doesn't matter what the timeline is, like that is a horrible state of suffering that no one should have to be in. Yeah. And Brian was not himself. And there was, it would have been me selfishly wanting him to be there longer for me to whatever, you know, and
exactly.
I knew that, when he died, I mean, it's also just like the waiting for someone to die is so hard because you know it's coming, right? And
and watching them breathe, watching like that flow, watching their to just like knowing it's coming. That's like a moment I felt so unprepared for, and Brad was on so many painkillers and morphine at that point, and you know, his last couple of days, and avoided a lot of it earlier because he wanted to write. He wanted to write a book, and you know, didn't have the energy to do any of the things that he wanted. But this was really important. But at the end, it was like just so traumatizing and devastating to watch the person you love be in that space in between. You know, still breathing and their heart is still beating, but they're not there. And I don't know like what Brad was taking in or hearing, and I hope he could feel and hear the love, but as the outside person, it did get to a point where, I mean, we literally talked about overdosing him. Like it was like, that's how much it was like, Brad would not want to be in this state, like, which is horrifying. Like, you're not getting better. Like, that's the thing. You're at the point you're not coming back. And, you know, there's, again, a whole other conversation we could have about this. And, you know, the way we die and assist death and all of these things. And, you know, overall, it was a moment, and Brad died shortly after that moment. So we didn't have to, but it was, you know, with his siblings of, do we just give him enough morphine to end this? And that is not something I've really talked about or written about. That was part of that experience of the fear, and also like so much love for this person and seeing them suffer so much that it feels like the most compassionate thing you can do in that moment. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Oh,
Gosh.
Those are some pretty heavy stories we have, eh?
I know. That was our quick introduction, or we both could talk so much more.
That's enough. We'll get into it more, I'm sure. I think it's a good sign that we love talking to each other, and we have a lot to say about all of this stuff. So I think that that's really good. Do you want to just like tell people a little bit about what they can expect from this little series?
Yeah. So I think before doing that, like, because we've touched on so many topics and haven't like gone deep, I think if there's anything people have questions, like I'd love for people to respond of what they would want us to talk more about. Our hope is that we do this every other week, that we do a new conversation based on one topic. So we can kind of deep dive into something. And we will share on stories, on Instagram stories ahead of time what the topic is, and put the little question box up and ask for you guys if you have questions about it, or any specific things within that topic you want us to talk about. Because we know a lot of these conversations are not easy, and they're not necessarily conversations that you might be having with people in your support. And so if there's something that we can be open about, we're both, you know, pretty open books about our experience and our opinions on it, that sometimes it's easier to have somebody else talk about it. So we really want people to share with us their questions, their comments, their fears, whatever, and we'll talk about it. And all of this will be, and we'll share on both of our IGTV and also on YouTube, but we're still figuring out all that stuff. Thursday night is the goal. So you guys can
Thursday night is the goal.
Your wine or your tea or whatever, and join us.
Yeah. And yeah, I think we're just going to sort of see where it goes, and hoping that this can kind of spark and open up some of the conversations that I feel like there is a need for within the grief space, that I was certainly looking for in my early grief, and even now, just sort of open, candid, real conversations about what it's actually like. Because like I was saying at the beginning, I think that so much of what we're going through is just so taboo, or like my new thing I'm going to be saying now is niche. We're in a very specific niche. I like that. And so we need dialogue. We need to get the conversation going about these things. And I think that it can be both for people who are going through it, who are like, oh yes, because that has been the most, I kind of hate the word healing in a grief context, but also I'm kind of trying to come around to it. And it is like something like healing. Like that is the closest thing that I found to healing, is like hearing somebody else and being like, oh my God, I relate. Like that is how it's been for me too, or that was part of my experience. And there's just something that feels so isolating about going through such a traumatic loss, and like losing your spouse, and then being a widow when you're like, you were 33, I was 34. Like it's just, you know, it's so isolating. So if we can sort of create a space to have these open conversations, I think that would be awesome. And then in terms of our first real episode is going to be 2 weeks from now, and it's going to be about how we can all help create a more grief literate society. And touching upon some of the ways in which our society right now is incredibly grief stupid or grief averse, and sort of some situations, sort of what our perspective was. And I hope that these conversations can also be helpful for people who have not yet been through a really hard loss, but maybe know somebody who's been through a hard loss, because I think to hear our perspectives of like, this is how this, you know, grief illiterate society actually affected us, real experiences that we had, and how much harder that made our lives at an already incredibly hard time. Whereas if we had a little bit more of like a general grief literacy and grief education, I think that it would be, I don't even want to say easier, because I think going through a traumatic loss like we have is like never going to be easy in any way, but somehow more supported, you know, somehow less isolating, somehow less completely, and, you know, somehow less alone, you know? So that's kind of my hope. And yeah, anything else you want to say before we finish it up?
Yeah, I think the importance of the first conversation sets up hopefully the rest of our conversations, because really it's about how do we talk about this? What are some of the things that we experienced that were not helpful? What was helpful? And again, like you said, if you are a grief supporter, if you are somebody that maybe isn't, and it's really important. And so we're hoping, you know, to share this with people who don't necessarily understand and can be better support systems and know how to have these conversations as we dive deep into specific topics. I think will be really helpful. So I'm excited to kind of lay the foundation in our first episode of how do we even have a conversation about something that's impossible, that no one knows what to say, no matter what, you'll say the wrong thing, everything is different. Like there's so many different variables here, just to help have that dialogue and make it okay to talk about it, even if you don't know what you're saying or don't know what the answer is.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm excited.
Me too. I guess that's it.
I think that's it. I think that's a wrap.
Okay. So you're never gonna watch these, basically.
I feel like I will, but that one, it's just, I don't know. I'll just watch you. Lock myself off. I got some cute way to end this.
Grief Chats Week 1.
Week 1.